Evelyn Thompson had always been a woman of simple pleasures. At 72, she had seen enough of life to appreciate the finer things, but never sought them out for herself. To her, luxury wasn't defined by flashy cars or designer outfits. It was in quiet moments with family, a warm meal shared, or the sense of belonging wherever she went. Evelyn wasn't someone to demand attention, but she certainly never expected to be treated as invisible. That evening, she had planned something she hadn't done in years, a nice dinner out. Her grandson, Jordan Thompson, had recently invited her to a special dinner at one of the city's most prestigious restaurants. The kind of place where the waitstaff wore uniforms that could have been plucked straight from a fashion magazine, and where everything from the silverware to the napkins felt like a statement of elegance. Evelyn had been excited about the evening all week. Her dress was simple but elegant, a soft lavender gown that made her feel graceful, the color complementing her silver hair. She had her hair done at the local salon and even put on her favorite pearl earrings. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She just wanted to enjoy a quiet meal with her grandson, something that had been rare since he had become the CEO of a rapidly growing business. When she arrived at the restaurant, she felt the atmosphere shift immediately. The marble floors gleamed under the soft lighting, and the ambient music provided a soothing backdrop. The restaurant's grand chandelier hung overhead, casting a warm golden light across the space. Guests in tuxedos and cocktail dresses surrounded her, laughing softly and sipping wine, an environment filled with sophistication. Evelyn stepped up to the hostess stand, where a young woman named Chloe Allen greeted her with a stiff smile. "Good evening. How can I help you?" "I'm here for my reservation," Evelyn replied, handing over the booking confirmation. Her voice was steady, a mixture of excitement and calm anticipation in her heart. Chloe looked at the reservation, then back at Evelyn, pausing for a beat longer than necessary. The smile didn't quite reach her eyes. A subtle shift of her posture, a tiny frown at the corner of her mouth, and Evelyn instantly noticed the change. She hadn't even walked through the doors yet, but already she felt out of place. "Could you give me a moment?" Chloe asked, her tone suddenly colder than it had been when she greeted her. "I'll need to confirm your booking." Evelyn nodded, her hands trembling slightly. It wasn't the first time someone had made her feel like she didn't belong. Ageism had a way of sneaking into the smallest of interactions, and Evelyn had come to accept that some people would never see her as capable or worthy of respect just because of her age. Still, she had always tried to push past that and embrace her own worth. But this was different. Chloe disappeared into the back, leaving Evelyn standing alone in the opulent lobby. She felt a pang of discomfort, but she wasn't about to let it ruin her night. She was here for Jordan, and nothing would take away the joy of spending time with him. A few moments later, Chloe returned with a manager in tow. Marcus West, a tall man in his early 40s with a confident stride and a crisp suit that barely looked like it had ever been touched. His hair was combed back in a precise style, his face neutral, but his eyes betrayed a hint of impatience. "This is Mrs. Thompson?" he asked, his voice clipped, as if speaking to her was an inconvenience. Chloe nodded quickly, and Marcus turned his attention back to Evelyn. "Mrs. Thompson, it seems there's been an issue with your reservation," he said, a little too matter-of-factly. "We typically reserve our premium tables for guests who fit our brand image. I'm afraid we can't seat you in the main dining area." Evelyn's heart sank. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice steady despite the growing knot in her stomach. "I have a reservation. I was invited here." Marcus glanced at Chloe for a moment before returning his gaze to Evelyn. "I'm afraid that, with your current attire and your appearance, we're unable to accommodate you at this time." The words hit her like a slap. Current attire? She was wearing a dress that could have been worn at any fancy dinner, any event where people came together to celebrate. But here she was, judged by the simplest of things. A deep sense of humiliation washed over her, and for the first time in her life, Evelyn felt like she had been reduced to nothing more than her age and appearance. I don't understand," Evelyn said, her voice wavering. "I have a reservation. Your staff confirmed it." Marcus's response was cold, almost rehearsed. "I'm sorry, but this is the policy. We have certain expectations for our guests. I'm happy to assist you in finding another place to dine, or perhaps you could make an appointment to come back at a later time." Evelyn stood frozen for a moment as the weight of what had just happened sank in. She had never been one to raise a scene, but this wasn't just any mistake. This was blatant discrimination. It wasn't just the treatment of an elderly woman. It was the stripping away of her dignity, the refusal to even recognize her as a human being worthy of respect. Without a word, she turned on her heel and walked out of the restaurant. The echoes of her footsteps on the polished floor rang louder than any words could have. Jordan Thompson had always believed in doing things the right way. He had built his business empire from the ground up, dealing with the struggles of being a young black CEO in a world that often looked past his accomplishments. He had fought through biases and broken barriers. But one thing had always remained constant: his respect for his family, especially his grandmother, Evelyn. Evelyn had raised him when his parents couldn't. She was his rock, his guiding light, and his biggest supporter. The thought of anything happening to her, especially something as deeply hurtful as discrimination, was simply unbearable. When he received the call that evening, he could hear the hurt in her voice. She never cried, but there was something different this time. "Jordan, something happened tonight," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't want you to make a fuss, but they didn't let me in." Jordan sat upright, his pulse quickening. "What do you mean they didn't let you in? You had a reservation, didn't you?" Evelyn explained the events at the restaurant, how she was turned away for her appearance, how they judged her based on her age, and how she was essentially humiliated by the staff. He could hear the resignation in her words, but also the quiet anger she held back. Jordan felt his blood run cold. His grandmother had been a dignified woman, someone who had taught him values of kindness, respect, and hard work. To hear that she had been treated with such disdain, all because of her age and the simple fact that she didn't fit some imagined mold of who belonged in an exclusive restaurant, was infuriating. "I'll handle this," Jordan said, his voice low and filled with resolve. "I'm coming to the restaurant." Jordan stormed through the restaurant's front doors with a controlled anger. He was dressed in a smart blazer, his usual sharp, confident self. But tonight, his gaze was colder, sharper. He had been building his business for years, and now his grandmother's dignity had been trampled on. No one was going to get away with this. The hostess, Chloe Allen, was still behind the counter when Jordan arrived. He could see her face fall when she recognized him. She wasn't expecting him to show up. She hadn't expected anyone to come to the defense of an elderly woman who had been humiliated. "Mr. Thompson," Chloe said, her voice shaking slightly as she greeted him. "How may I help you?" Jordan wasted no time. He wasn't interested in pleasantries or small talk. He walked straight up to the counter, his eyes narrowing as he looked at her. "I'm here about my grandmother," he said, his tone unwavering. "Evelyn Thompson. You turned her away tonight, and I want to know why." Chloe stumbled over her words. I didn't mean—" "Save it," Jordan cut her off. "No one should ever be treated like that, and certainly not my grandmother." "What exactly happened here?" Chloe hesitated, glancing nervously toward Marcus West, the restaurant manager, who had just walked out from the back. Jordan recognized him immediately. He had seen him in the restaurant a few times before, always standing with an air of superiority. Marcus was dressed in a crisp suit, his posture too stiff to be genuine. When he saw Jordan, he immediately tried to put on his professional face. But the thin veneer of politeness didn't fool Jordan. "Mr. Thompson," Marcus greeted him, extending his hand, though Jordan didn't shake it. "I understand there's been a misunderstanding. We were simply enforcing our standards of dress and etiquette." Jordan's eyes flashed with indignation. "Standards of dress? My grandmother wore a beautiful dress and was more than qualified to be here. But you treated her like she was invisible. Tell me, Marcus, what kind of standards do you have when you can't even recognize a worthy guest standing right in front of you?" Marcus stiffened. "It's not personal, sir. Our staff just—" "It is personal," Jordan interrupted, his voice growing louder. "You refused my grandmother based on your assumptions, based on the way she looked. That's not just bad service. It's discriminatory behavior." The room fell silent. Some of the other patrons had stopped eating, noticing the tension. Chloe stood frozen, unsure how to react. Marcus's face turned a shade paler as he realized the severity of the situation. "You're the CEO, aren't you?" Marcus stammered. Jordan nodded. "That's right. And I'm about to make sure that what happened to my grandmother doesn't happen to anyone else in this restaurant." Jordan didn't just come here to confront the issue. He came with a solution. The restaurant's behavior needed to be addressed, and it wasn't just a matter of apologizing. This was about making sure that the restaurant changed its culture, its approach to customer service, and its internal policies. He wouldn't stand for this kind of discrimination. "I'm not here for apologies," Jordan said, looking directly at Marcus. "I want change. Immediately. You're going to revise your dress code and behavior standards. I want your staff to undergo training, not just in etiquette, but in how to treat people with dignity, no matter their age, appearance, or background." He paused, letting the words sink in. "You are going to publicly apologize to my grandmother, and I want a formal letter from the restaurant, posted for all your customers to see. stating that discrimination will never be tolerated here. Marcus looked like he was about to argue, but Jordan raised his hand. No more excuses. If this restaurant values the customers who walk through its doors, then it's time to prove it. You've lost a loyal customer today, but you still have a chance to fix this. As Jordan stood there, watching Marcus's reaction, he realized that this wasn't just about one bad experience in a restaurant. It was about a systemic problem that existed in society. The subtle ways in which people of certain backgrounds were dismissed, treated as less than, or overlooked simply because they didn't meet someone else's standards of who deserved respect. He wasn't going to stand by while his grandmother's dignity was stomped on, and he wasn't going to let this restaurant get away with treating people like Evelyn Thompson as if they didn't matter. This was a moment to stand up for what was right, to demand justice, and to set an example for others. Jordan knew that this fight wasn't going to be over in one conversation, but he also knew that making it clear that the restaurant's treatment of customers wasn't acceptable was the first step in changing the culture. As he left the restaurant, he felt a sense of pride knowing that he had stood up for the person who had raised him, the person who had given him everything. In the days that followed, the restaurant implemented a new policy and underwent staff training. A public apology was made, and the message was clear. Respect for all customers, regardless of age or appearance, was now their top priority. Jordan's actions sent ripples through the business world. His leadership was a testament to the fact that it wasn't just about profits or prestige. It was about doing the right thing, no matter what. And the lesson he learned from that night stayed with him for the rest of his life. No one, no matter who they are, should ever be made to feel less than or undeserving of respect. After the meeting, things began to change at the restaurant. But it wasn't immediate. The first step, the public apology, was only the beginning. The ripple effects of Jordan's actions reverberated far beyond the walls of that one restaurant. They began to reach other establishments, other industries, and eventually even the broader conversation about how we treat people based on appearance, age, or race. The apology to Evelyn Thompson was officially made the following week. The restaurant's social media accounts published a heartfelt message, acknowledging the incident and outlining the steps they would take to ensure something like it would never happen again. The message was shared widely, but the real test lay in what followed, how the restaurant would live up to its words. Jordan, however, didn't stop there. As he worked through the aftermath of the incident with his team and other restaurant chains, he realized that this issue wasn't isolated. It wasn't just about one restaurant. It was part of a bigger, systemic problem that affected many sectors. In the restaurant business, the hospitality industry in general, and even beyond, people of certain appearances, ages, and races were still being subtly and sometimes overtly discriminated against. He didn't just want to see change at that one restaurant. He wanted to be part of a broader solution, to help shift the industry's focus from superficial standards to real human decency. He set out to collaborate with organizations that focused on diversity, inclusion, and fairness in customer service. It was time to address these biases at a larger level. The restaurant began to implement the changes Jordan demanded. In addition to revising its dress code and customer service standards, they brought in a well-known diversity and inclusion expert, Dr. Maria Gilbert, to guide the management team and frontline staff through regular training sessions. The training wasn't just about how to greet a customer. It was about understanding the deep-rooted biases that could shape how one saw another person. It was about recognizing that the experiences and perceptions of customers could be shaped by things beyond their control: their skin color, their gender, their age, their socioeconomic status, and that it was a manager's responsibility to create a space where people felt welcome, not judged. Within a few months, the restaurant staff began to see real shifts in their attitudes. At first, there was resistance from some employees, those who didn't think they needed such training or who felt they hadn't done anything wrong. But Jordan made it clear that this wasn't just about being nice to people. It was about treating everyone as equals and with the respect they deserved. Slowly but surely, attitudes changed, and the management team began enforcing the new policies more strictly. Evelyn's experience had ignited a fire, and it burned bright in the restaurant's heart. The public apology wasn't just lip service. It was the beginning of a complete transformation. For Jordan, that was a small victory in a larger battle for equality. But the story didn't end at the restaurant. As news of the incident spread and the changes Jordan pushed for gained attention, the media began to cover it extensively. What started as a private issue in one restaurant became a much larger conversation about ageism, racism, and classism in industries everywhere. Jordan was invited to conferences, public talks, and news interviews. His words began to shape a broader cultural shift, and he wasn't backing down. On the second day after the incident, the local news had picked up the story. The headline read, "CEO fights for respect and equality after grandmother denied service in luxury restaurant." The narrative around the story wasn't just about the unfortunate event, but about how one act of discrimination could spiral into a global conversation. Soon after, articles appeared in major publications, and interviews began circulating about Jordan's stance on respect for all people. Jordan started seeing his stance on respect being discussed in places he never imagined. It was no longer just about his grandmother. It was a fight against institutionalized prejudice. He was proud of the ripple effect it had created. Others in the business community reached out to him to discuss similar issues in their own companies. He shared what he had learned through his experience and offered advice on how they could address their internal problems. Jordan had become more than just the CEO of his company. He had become an advocate for change in the way companies treated people. Months passed, and as the restaurant continued to implement the changes Jordan had demanded, they began to see a change in their customer base. What had once been a restaurant catering primarily to a high-end clientele who placed importance on appearance and exclusivity was now becoming a place for everyone. Word spread that the restaurant was an inclusive establishment, welcoming to people of all ages, appearances, and backgrounds. Customers, especially those from historically marginalized communities, began to show up more often. They appreciated the atmosphere of inclusion where they didn't have to worry about being judged based on their looks or background. People came for the food, sure, but they also came because they knew they would be treated with respect. This shift wasn't just about increased business. It was about showing the world that inclusivity could be profitable. Jordan saw firsthand how businesses that treated people as equals, regardless of their age or appearance, could thrive. The restaurant's reputation grew, and the changes became a model for other restaurants to follow. By the time the year had ended, Jordan had become a regular at the restaurant once again. This time, however, he was greeted with a warm handshake and a smile from the staff, all of whom had undergone the new training and embraced the values of respect and inclusivity. Evelyn, his grandmother, also returned to the restaurant, this time with a different experience. The staff recognized her immediately and greeted her with the utmost respect. They treated her not just as a customer, but as a valued guest. It was a far cry from the cold reception she had received months earlier. Jordan sat with her at the table, sipping his drink and enjoying a quiet moment. It wasn't just the food or the setting that made the moment special. It was the knowledge that they had made a difference. What had started as a fight for his grandmother's dignity had turned into a movement, one that would carry on long after the last dish had been served. The restaurant had not just changed its policies, it had changed its culture, and it was something they would never forget. Jordan's final words to the restaurant's management were clear. "This is just the beginning. Let's keep moving forward." And move forward they did. As the months went by, the ripple effect of Jordan's actions extended far beyond the confines of the restaurant and its corporate walls. His efforts to push for inclusivity and respect had set off a wave of change in industries across the country, and soon he found himself at the forefront of a much larger movement. The incident that had started with his grandmother's mistreatment had now turned into a powerful statement about dignity and fairness. Jordan's phone buzzed constantly with calls and messages from business leaders, nonprofits, and even local activists. Everyone was asking him to share his approach, his lessons learned, and his strategies for enacting change. What started as a single act of defiance against racial and ageist discrimination had now grown into a nationwide conversation. People were ready to listen, and Jordan felt an overwhelming responsibility to continue leading this fight. Jordan's efforts didn't just make waves in the restaurant industry. Other businesses, particularly those in the hospitality and service sectors, began to take notice of the positive changes at the restaurant. Executives and HR managers reached out to Jordan for guidance on how they could implement similar programs within their companies. Through webinars, meetings, and conferences, Jordan shared the lessons he had learned. He spoke about how change could be achieved by starting with small, actionable steps, like ensuring diversity in hiring, revising training materials to address unconscious biases, and creating a workplace environment where people of all backgrounds could thrive. He encouraged leaders to challenge the status quo and take a stand against discrimination, whether it was based on age, race, or appearance. The most significant takeaway from his talks was that inclusivity wasn't just the right thing to do. It was also a smart business decision. Companies that embraced diversity and equality were seeing tangible results in customer loyalty, employee retention, and overall reputation. In fact, businesses that actively worked to eliminate discriminatory practices were reaping the benefits of being viewed as socially responsible. Jordan was soon invited to join panels alongside well-known advocates for civil rights and social justice. His efforts were being recognized in ways he never anticipated, but he remained grounded, focusing on the core message that everyone, regardless of their background, deserves to be treated with respect. The impact of Jordan's actions on the restaurant wasn't limited to the internal changes or the attention he was receiving from the business world. Public perception also began to shift. Customers started to take notice of the restaurant's new approach to inclusivity and respect. Positive reviews flooded in, with patrons praising the welcoming atmosphere and the efforts made to make all guests feel valued. The restaurant's social media channels began to showcase their commitment to diversity. Photos of customers from various backgrounds, ages, and walks of life enjoying their meals were shared with pride. The restaurant even introduced special promotions celebrating different cultures, ensuring that they weren't just talking about inclusivity, they were living it. As more people experienced the changes firsthand, word of mouth spread. People who had previously avoided the restaurant, fearing they wouldn't fit in, began to return. The changes brought in a wider, more diverse clientele, which led to an increase in business, but more importantly, a shift in how customers perceived the brand. No longer was the restaurant seen as a place that catered to a select few. It became a place for everyone, a reflection of the community it served. Jordan's actions also resonated deeply within the world of public accountability. When the CEO of the restaurant made his public statement, it sent a powerful message to other businesses. Actions have consequences. The restaurant's acknowledgement of the issue and the steps they took to fix it showed the public that businesses could be held accountable for the way they treat their customers, and that change was possible. Jordan knew that it wasn't enough to simply make changes in one business. The larger societal implications were just as important. He continued to advocate for systemic change in the hospitality industry and beyond. He worked closely with other businesses to help them implement similar policies that focused on respect, equality, and inclusivity. He also championed the importance of holding companies accountable when they failed to live up to their commitments. For example, if a business made a promise to treat all customers fairly, but their actions didn't align with those values, it was up to the public to call them out, and for businesses to act on that feedback. As for the restaurant, it continued to thrive under its new policies. The management team, now equipped with a stronger understanding of diversity and inclusivity, worked hard to ensure the changes they had made were not just a temporary shift, but part of their long-term business strategy. One of the most impactful changes was the introduction of a mentorship program for young people of color who were interested in hospitality management. The restaurant's leadership believed that real change meant not only training current employees, but also creating opportunities for future generations to succeed. They partnered with local high schools and colleges to provide internships and training programs, ensuring that young people from underrepresented communities had access to the same career opportunities as their peers. The restaurant also hosted regular community events that celebrated different cultural traditions, food, and customs. These events allowed people to connect and learn from each other, creating a stronger sense of belonging and understanding. Over time, the restaurant became a hub for diversity, inclusion, and community engagement, all because of one simple decision to stand up for what was right. Looking back, Jordan knew that the journey wasn't over. While the restaurant had made significant progress, there were still issues to address in other industries, other businesses, and other communities. But what he had achieved with the restaurant was a beginning, a blueprint for change that could inspire countless others to take action. He thought about his grandmother, who had unknowingly sparked a movement by simply wanting to enjoy a nice meal. She had been the catalyst, and Jordan would never forget the lesson she had taught him, that no one, no matter their age, background, or appearance, should ever be treated with anything less than the utmost respect. The fight for justice, equality, and dignity was far from over, but Jordan knew he wasn't alone in this. He had the support of his team, his community, and countless others who believed in the power of respect. Together, they would continue to push for a world where every person was treated with the dignity they deserved, no matter where they came from or how they looked. For Jordan, the work had just begun, and as long as there were people like him, people willing to stand up, speak out, and demand change, there was always hope for a better tomorrow. A year later, the restaurant had become a shining example of how businesses could thrive while embracing inclusivity. The story of how Jordan stood up for his grandmother had become a beacon of hope and change. It was no longer just about one restaurant, but about a movement that was reshaping industries and communities. And as Jordan stood with his grandmother in the restaurant, watching the diverse array of customers enjoying their meals, he couldn't help but feel proud. He had fought for her dignity, for the dignity of everyone who had been overlooked or judged. And he knew that the world was a little better because of it. The restaurant's success wasn't just measured in its profits or accolades, but in the respect it gave to everyone who walked through its doors. And that, Jordan believed, was the true mark of success.
It was an ordinary morning when Sarah Washington, a well-respected elderly woman in her early 70s, walked into Grandview Hotel, a luxury establishment known for its impeccable customer service and high-end clientele. Sarah, a proud Black woman who had lived a full life full of wisdom and dignity, had been a long-time customer at Grandview. She had visited the hotel countless times over the years, often attending high-profile events and enjoying the luxurious accommodations. On this particular day, she was just coming in to check out the spa and grab a cup of coffee at the hotel's cafe. But this morning was unlike any other. As Sarah stepped inside the hotel's grand lobby, her cane tapping lightly on the marble floors, she walked confidently toward the front desk, expecting the usual warm greeting. She smiled politely at the receptionist, Emily, a young woman in her late 20s who had just started working there a few weeks ago. "Good morning. I'd like to check in for my spa appointment," Sarah said, her voice calm and friendly. But Emily, who had been glancing down at her phone, looked up with an expression of clear irritation. Her gaze flicked over Sarah, sizing her up, and for some reason, an invisible barrier seemed to come between them. Emily didn't respond right away, but her eyes narrowed as she looked at Sarah's modest attire, a simple dress and cardigan, compared to the upscale outfits of other guests in the lobby. "I'm sorry, but I don't think you belong here," Emily said, her voice cold and dismissive. Taken aback, Sarah's face softened in confusion. "Excuse me?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly, both from the shock and the weight of the judgment she had just faced. Emily's tone was sharp, her posture rigid. "I said, I don't think you belong here. You don't look like you're supposed to be in a place like this," she added, her eyes lingering on Sarah's bag. A simple cloth purse that Sarah had carried for years, a sentimental gift from her late husband. Before Sarah could say another word, Emily reached down and grabbed a glass of water from the front desk. With no warning, she threw the cold water at Sarah's chest. The shock of the water splashing against her skin made Sarah gasp, her hands instinctively raising to shield her face. She stumbled backward, stunned by the humiliation. "Get out of here," Emily snapped, her words dripping with disdain. "We don't serve people like you. You're causing a scene." Sarah stood frozen for a moment, water dripping down her dress, but she refused to let tears fall. The sting of what had just happened was far deeper than any cold water could inflict. She had worked hard all her life to be respected, to show that she belonged in any space she walked into. And here, in a hotel she had frequented for years, she had been treated like an outsider. No, worse, like someone who didn't even deserve basic human decency. But Sarah was no stranger to racism. She had faced it all her life, from childhood in the segregated South to adulthood as she built a successful career. She knew what discrimination looked like, and now she felt the weight of it in a place she thought was above such petty hatred. Without saying a word, Sarah turned and walked out of the hotel lobby, the stares from other guests heavy on her back. Her dignity, however, remained intact. As she stepped outside into the bright sunlight, she knew what she had to do. She would not let this go unchallenged. Just minutes later, Marcus Washington, the CEO of Grandview Hotels, arrived at the lobby. Marcus was a man of presence, and his reputation as a successful Black entrepreneur in the luxury hospitality industry preceded him. He had worked hard to build Grandview Hotels into a global brand, opening branches across major cities worldwide. His expertise in the industry and dedication to inclusivity had earned him respect